Hey, everybody, this is Darin Francis with Harbinger Lane and Signals in Higher Education podcast. With me today is Kimberly Eckert, Head of Instructional Innovation and Apprenticeships from Craft Education. Hi, Kim.
Hi, Darin. I'm very happy to harbinge with you.
I love that. I love that because people should be harbinging.
Harbinger. I love it.
That's great. Well, listen, I am excited to have this conversation. You know that what we're doing with the Signals in Higher Education podcast is we've really just let experiential learning broadly take over the airwaves for us. We're just talking to everybody in every corner of higher education, in workforce, about ways that experiential learning can benefit uh, the community, help people get jobs, help people learn. And there's no better context for experiential learning really than the kind of work that you do with educational prep programs, apprenticeships, and et cetera, and the education space. So love that we can have this conversation. I think people need to know a little more about you. And I was really interested to see that from your journey so far, teacher of English, special education in the classroom environment, then you're teacher of the year, and then you're leading teacher preparation programs at a college level. And now you're designing apprenticeship pathways nationally at Craft Education. So I think I have found the person with the greatest background in this space. But talk to me about your background in teaching and how that really kind of sets you up in the mindset around thinking about teacher preparation. I mean, how did your teaching background lead to teacher prep related work?
All right, awesome. And it's funny because if you'd even asked me 7 or 8 years ago how it connected, I don't know that I could have answered now that I've got so much hindsight, right? So yes, definitely. I mean, I've now been an educator, and a teacher, like a classroom teacher, right? 17, 18 years. And I think it's coupled with other things because yes, I am a highly skilled teacher. And I actually love saying that because we don't normally brag about our skill set, but we should. But also a huge part of that, I was also an instructional coach and a master teacher and, an instructional administrator. And so I've been there as myself in a classroom, but I've also been there working with teachers, at the classroom level, the district level, the state level as well, across so many different backgrounds and skill sets and needs and opportunities. And I think that that's probably what's informed, my worldview in that sense, but also my ability to help people tap into their abilities whenever it comes to teaching and leading.
Mm. And give us a little bit of context. I mean, if I think about teacher preparation, um, my mom and my dad both were teachers, and my mom was an elementary school teacher, and my dad was a high school teacher. Um, my mom did all the work as a teacher. She was, the one working on her classroom, halfway through the summer, getting it ready. And we moved her recently from Michigan to Virginia, and like we donated to schools in the area what felt like truckloads of teacher prep materials and different things that she'd used in the classroom environment.
It's funny, like the teacher in me wants to have been there to like sift through it to see if I
Right.
could use it.
Right. Oh, totally. Yeah. But when I think about teacher preparation, having in particular my mom in mind, I think about how experiential the process is. And yet, talk to us a little bit about where is the problem today where we don't have enough teachers, where there's a teacher shortage. And so help me understand a program designed to be so hands-on and experiential. How is it that we are in a place where we have teachers enter the classroom and then leave, who don't find their fit? Like, what do you think is going on in that space?
Sure. And I think this is where another piece of, the positions that I've played on the field come into play as well, because certainly there's my own lived experience, right? But mine or whatever kept me out. I was a second career. I was a social worker before I was a teacher, so I didn't even come the direct route. But somewhere along the way, even whenever I was still all day like teaching English and coaching teachers, I started to study this intently because in the area where I am, a pretty rural area in Louisiana, and even as a learner, I've never been a learner or a teacher in a school system within Louisiana that was fully staffed. Like we've had pretty pervasive teacher shortages long before COVID made it sexy, like truly. I've never been in a space where every position was filled by a highly skilled licensed teacher. And so I started to turn attention to this probably 2017 and really looking at the issues within the pipeline. Like, why don't we have a pipeline? Why do we have job fairs and we don't have enough people coming? Why, whenever we say we're going to diversify the pipeline, we don't have a diverse audience that takes us up on it? And so I started to do a lot of research, a lot of focus groups with young people even, to really understand, because as a teacher, it's not enough for me to know that something's a problem. I could say it's a problem forever, but my job presumably is to solve problems, and to get us to where we need to be. And so there's so many different areas. There's so much research that's done on this. But I think it comes down to a huge part, a lack of accessibility, a really expensive experience that doesn't end up having a whole lot of monetary payload in the end. And I think that oftentimes whenever we lose people, especially as someone who's coached teachers in those early years, the classroom that perhaps we are often preparing them for doesn't exist. It's one from decades past. And I think we drastically underestimate the skill sets and the experiences that a highly skilled teacher needs to be able to be successful in their job without it being dangled at the end of a promise, like just make it 5 years and then you'll come to work and feel good about your job. That's too long. And the type of people that teaching attracts, they're impact driven, they're mission driven. They don't want to go to work and feel like they're not doing what they set out to do. And they certainly can't sustain that type of moral injury for 5 years. And so I think all of those things play a part, and the part that I'm most primed to be able to do something about, the lever that I'm most trained to pull, in addition to advocacy around pay, which is a whole different podcast for a different day, is what helps us feel really successful, where we can enter and feel immediately like we're making the difference that we set out to make from the start, and not after 3 years or 5 years.
Right. Oh, that's so key. Well, look, some of what you've learned, I mean, you just referenced back to 2017, but some of what you've learned just has come from not just the reps that you had to do in the classroom environment, but your work teaching in these programs. But you also were the dean of the Oxford Teacher College at Reach University before coming to Craft. So like maybe kind of walk just through the inflection points for you from being in the classroom to working in teacher prep to being that dean until now. Like, what are some of just the big flashpoints of aha moments for you in those different roles as you experienced it?
I think for each step of the way, there was so much of a realization of like obstacles that were still there that I still didn't have it sort of within my reach, for lack of a better word, to be able to do anything about. So like I said, whenever I was still a teacher, I founded a program called Educators Rising in Louisiana. And that really did a good job of getting that early interest of like high school students to kind of sift through and really experience teaching as it is. Like not teaching as let's decorate bulletin boards, right? But actually the leadership, the creativity, the problem solving, the social justice impact or implications of opportunities for kids who really want to make a difference, but just didn't have an experience in their classroom that taught them that that was the way. However, it didn't take me long to realize that, yes, it's critical. It's important to have that plate spinning where we're recruiting the next generation. That it also fell to me to look at who's already here, like who's already showing up every day. And so that's what lent itself to my experience with the university that you mentioned, in taking a look at my peers, like paraprofessionals and school secretaries and people that I worked alongside with for the longest time, and knew that whenever we were down and out, they were the best teachers on the hall sometimes, especially in spaces where we didn't have a fully staffed building. And just knowing the passion and like the understanding of communities that my peers were already coming with, and they just lacked sort of skills. And so I started to do some training just within a district. Like, okay, we have you literally teaching in a reading intervention. You're not a reading interventionist. I'm a reading specialist. It took me years to learn that and loads of student loan debt. How can I take everything I've learned and help you so that you're effective tomorrow? Because you're going to be there whether you're trained for it or not. And so I think that that was another piece where I'm like, wait, why aren't they teachers? What they want to be here. They're getting paid $12 an hour. They're really eager to learn everything that I'm teaching each month in these workshops. And then it was peeling back another layer that at some point they had to choose between paying for school or paying to feed their families or themselves or an aging parent or a million things that make people have to make tough decisions where maybe their dream can't quite be realized when they wanted it to. And so my opportunity working at the university, one of the first spaces where we were looking at on the job learning and apprenticeship degrees was taking this whole entire workforce that's showing up, again, trained or not. It wasn't just my experience in West Baton Rouge and Louisiana. This is all across the country, that people are in the classroom anyway. Why are we withholding what it takes to make them successful? Why are we not really taking the time to train them on, the science of reading or on behavioral research or on any of the things that can make them effective as they want to be? And so having the opportunity to do that was really powerful. But then I realized, wait, this is only here and teachers impact driven. What would happen if we really took a look at what made that program successful and how could we help places where they are to also be able to fill their own needs in terms of a grow your own? Because I've also learned, if nothing else, that what works in one space doesn't work in another. And that's the way it should be. And it's also why we should stop trying to cram the same model for everyone, because the beauty of what makes America America is that, we're different regionally. We're bound by different rules, by different approaches, by different structures, different opportunities, and different people. And so being able to sort of help people find that space and leaders find that space and policymakers find that space so that they get what their community needs in terms of a grow your own. That was a long answer for a journey that, it hasn't gone on long enough, but here we are.
Well, it's going to go on for a while. I think we need you in this space, and I'm glad to hear it so far. You touched on something which is, I have to say, it's a little bit overwhelming for me. It's out of my purview and understanding, is just the policy side. So like when it comes to teacher prep from a policy perspective, and you were talking about equity issues and you're talking about, different state requirements. What surprised you most about the disconnect between policy requirements and then what's actually happening in programs?
And that was a huge learning experience for me that I didn't really understand until I took on, the seat of being a dean of a teacher's college and the clinical supervisor, designer, and director, right? Like I had to learn it all. And like with anything in life, it's so much easier to be on the outside looking in and assume that we know all the things. And it wasn't until I was really in that seat that I understood that, number one, programs for ed prep are really constrained by structures that were never built for job embedded learning. And teaching is such an active field. And so the thought that you might go through that many years of an experience and you really only get in there to harness your craft the last year, that's a really interesting thing. And it's something that we don't see everywhere else. Like a pilot doesn't start by reading manuals for 3 years. Like from day one, they're able to kind of get into a cockpit and learn how to fly. And so I think that was really interesting to kind of look at that because they're constrained by, credit hours and seat time and like policies that are well-meaning, but sometimes we don't intend to look at the consequences of them. Lots of unfunded mandates that districts are often left sort of struggling to meet, but don't really have the budget embedded in their finances for. And I think that was a huge piece. And then whenever it comes to maybe policies around clinical practice, again, once we codify something in law, it's a law. And so making sweeping policies that affect clinical placements, but assuming that every rural place has access to a clinical resident from a certain place that can actually meet those needs. We want things to be really high quality and really tightly bound, and I get that. But sometimes we're a little too rigid and we put things maybe into law that aren't ready or that don't really accommodate or support the reality that happens on the ground. And there were some things that even a person who was in an under-resourced space and understood the rural things, I had a huge awakening and understanding that sometimes if you write into law that a mentor has to have 5 years of experience, but you're in a space that's so hit by teacher shortage, the most senior person might have been there 2 or 3 years, which was actually my experience in my third year of teaching. I became a mentor teacher, not because I was grand at teaching, but because there weren't a whole lot of other folks to choose from. And I was just like, if you teach me, I'll try. So I think it's things like that, well-meaning intentions. But we know that oftentimes policy, whenever it's set into practice, is if it's not informed by experts in the field, it won't always have the intended benefits or effects. And sometimes it's really hard to go back and retrofit things that weren't designed properly from the onset.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think let's talk a little bit about what it actually takes to run field placement and clinical experiences, because I'm also just interested in seeing and hearing kind of how you think about craft education's place in that realm. And so first, I guess to try and get like our heads around it, walk me through the life cycle of a student placement, from finding the mentor teacher to certifying the candidate completed the hours that were necessary, right? Like what's involved there? And if you want, take liberty and walk me beyond that, or on the front end or on the back end, just to sort of add color to it.
So from a typical program, because I've also been able to serve as like an adjunct for different teacher prep programs and a mentor, right, on the ground, to actually serve and partner with the university as a teacher coming into my classroom to teach them. And then also now from an apprenticeship standpoint, which looks pretty different, I would say, from a normal trajectory of a student teacher. But that process, it can vary, but typically you might start college, you really want to be a teacher and you're very excited. But your first couple of years, you're not even touching an education class. And by then, you're susceptible to outside influences like sexy careers that you could also do while you're waiting. Because whenever that joy was, whenever you worked at summer camp or you loved your English teacher, there's a lot that happens between that and like junior year. And so you take your classes, and then you find out that you've got to have like sort of earlier pre-licensure exams. So before you can even get into the school to possibly teach you how to pass the test, you have to take some tests to be able to get in. And I think people don't understand just how regulated and honestly how smart teachers are, like to even get to that point. They've already passed more licensure than like any other field, just to be able to step up to the plate and just step into the college. So if you successfully passed your early licensure and your knowledge checks, and if you still want to be a teacher 2 years into your experience, that's where you might actually be able to start observing classrooms, which is a little bit late, arguably, because by that point, you've already really dug in and formed other ideas. You're maybe not as moldable to what teaching actually is or requires of you. So you might start your observations, and then you don't actually get assigned a mentor with a capital M in that sense, or tangible experience. In most cases, you do have some innovative pilots that aren't apprenticeship degrees that start sooner. But for the most part, you really don't start student teaching or observing in earnest until much later in your program. And then we get to the other space of that, which we're having a reckoning with the expense of a student teaching or a clinical resident, where you're going in and you are working 40 hours a week and you are not drawing a wage. And that goes so far beyond your college experience, where you're able to work a couple of jobs. I'm side hustle queen. If I had gone a normal or traditional route, there's no way I could have afforded to stay alive in that sense. And I'm someone who loves teaching more than anything. And I am also someone who had to bow out of that process because how do you support yourself? So yeah, it's very late in the program that you're actually able to rekindle that joy you have. And then that's if you are independently wealthy or have enough college debt where you can afford to work 40 hours for free for 180 days if you're in a year-long residence. If not, it's about a half a year, so 6 months, which is still a pretty long time to be able to continue to hone your craft and learn and teach before you can graduate. Um, and that's a typical cycle.
There's so many places that I feel like there's so many points along the way where things can break down or somebody can get discouraged and drop out in the process. What like wave a magic wand for me on just that space. If you could only really leverage some sort of resource or insight or change in one area, like where would you make the biggest difference and why?
I think it would be, and this is where a lot of the work with craft comes in. So that's the second part of the question that you asked. I think if we're looking at like high yield and like a relatively minor move, it would be to get candidates in on the process of teaching and learning much, much, much sooner. Because it is incredibly exciting and rewarding, especially whenever you're not the one in the driver's seat. If you're like, the person that's like out here, because the thing is, we need people, right? Nobody said you have to have 2 or 3 years of theory before you can ever enter into a space. A lot of these folks are already working with kids. And again, we're not even talking about the glory that is apprenticeship. We're not even talking about that yet. But there's really no reason why pretty early on we can't invite people in an ed prep program or college to come help us, like come join the force. If we would, for example, I talked about science of reading. We could put those courses much earlier and then you become a powerhouse. You could like go apply to do a tutoring program, like with high dosage tutoring early on and start having impact. So it kind of, for lack of a better word, it becomes intoxicating to see that type of daily improvement in a child's learning and know that it's because of what you were able to do. And I think that can happen much, much earlier. And from what I've seen, even working with craft and working with other ed prep programs, even some that are very traditional, it's not that hard to kind of remap the sequence of when courses happen, where a person can actually become a vital part of a school team much, much sooner in their studies than it typically is right now. And I think that is a really easy way, earlier exposure, so that they can see that, oh my gosh, we need you. And then the benefit of that is you start honing your skills much sooner. Great teachers don't fall out of the sky. It takes years, and we can certainly start that process sooner.
That makes a lot of sense. It's also it's very much in line with when I'm talking to university leaders um, about experiential learning more broadly, project-based learning, virtual types of internships, and different, across the curriculum in different areas beyond education. And what it all points to is just that the earlier, what everybody says is the earlier you can give somebody experience and understanding of experience in the role that they're working towards, the better they persist, the better they do. If they're going to change careers, they can change careers or change majors way earlier. And there's just so many benefits to it. And what's kind of ironic to me is that as I've looked at experiential learning across primarily higher education, the uh, the U.S. institutions that are really doing it well would say that they're late to the game. That it's institutions in other countries like Canada or the UK that have really progressed around this, or they point to how in K-12 there's more project-based learning going on. There's more experiential learning happening for students. Uh, and so it's just ironic that we're talking about trying to give the very teachers that work with those students more experience earlier in their education in order to prepare them. Really, a really great point. But So now let's talk a little bit. Um, I had the opportunity, full disclosure, doing a little bit of work for Craft last year, talking to um, kind of EPP leaders across different types of institutions in the U.S. And I won't out anybody, but the truth is that many of them felt burned by or let down by the technology platforms that they had to use, or the lack of technology that they had available to them to help facilitate more of this process and more of the transparency and understanding that they needed to have in order to make better decisions on behalf of their students. So I'm just really curious, like, uh, from your standpoint, what role does technology ideally play in this path that we're talking about? Right? Like, where is it best applied? Clearly, full disclosure, we're talking about a really cool solution that Craft has developed, and um, no cost. It's a solution that's available today. Institutions can adopt and work with Craft to do so, which is great. I'll have you talk more about that. But maybe just sort of unpack, like, yeah, what is the role of the technology ideally today? And then why do you think what exists or what doesn't exist today in the market has really been missing the mark?
I think I'll take a step back with learning technology, period. Any technology, right? I think sometimes we forget that it's a tool, and we're going to hear that all around, especially if we look at AI and things. Technology is a tool. And I say this as someone who has been through lots of technology shifts in my classroom and who's embraced them. But whenever you go in with anything and like, I'm going to use this tool, but you don't know why you're using it, or you don't know what you're going to affect with it, or you don't know what you're trying to build or change or create as a result of it, you're not going to see the results that you would like to see. And I'll use examples. Like, I'm trying to think of some tools that have really stood the test of time for me as a teacher. Like, I really love, obviously a Google Classroom or Padlet. Let's look at Padlet. I didn't go in like, Padlet's cool, I want to use Padlet in my class. It's like, no, gosh, I really want my kids to be able to collaborate visually and together. And I want them to be able to like put in other sources, and I want them to be able to use that to link and to launch off of each other's ideas. What tool could I use for that? And then I'm like, oh, Padlet can do that. But I was very clear on what I needed the tool to be able to do first. And I think that when it comes to even craft, right? I first learned about craft whenever I was the dean of a university, and I was deep in the throes of designing an untested program, an untested theory, and an untested space. Like, talk about new kid on the block, like fighting for accreditation, fighting to be taken seriously, and knowing that my candidates were in classrooms right now. So what did I need? I needed data that I could interact with workforce, with the school district, that my faculty could see, that I could take a look at, that I could tether to like state standards for teaching, that I could look at apprenticeship standards that were barely forming. I needed to be able to see this all so that I wasn't like creating a mess for myself. So I needed something with the capability to do that. Also, program improvement was very important to me. As a classroom teacher, I don't know how to function without looking literally at yesterday's data to see it. What am I doing tomorrow as a result of it? So I never saw data in higher ed as something that we look at for accreditation, something that we look at for program review every few years. For me, we have data at our fingertips, and if we don't use it, we're just highly informed inactors. So I needed real-time data because I could tell myself and my fact, oh, we're killing it. Oh, we have the best. But how do I know if I can't see the effects of that through observations of the mentor on the ground, through what the principal's telling me? And so whenever I turn to craft, the way that I use that data, I had a very clear goal in mind. And that's the other side of what craft does. And so part one would be the data platform that connects workforce, the job site, the mentor, journey worker, the candidate themselves, higher ed, or the RTI, like all of our phrases in apprenticeship work. So that's one piece of it. But what we do with it is the other side, I think, of what craft can do. And it's helping spaces kind of learn how to use data to tell stories in ways that they maybe haven't harnessed before, because we're under so much pressure to use data for compliance, to use data for funding, which we can do that, but it can do so much more if we know exactly what we need to see happen. And we know that we're in control and command of how we use it. So part one, we're all going to be burned if we inherently don't lead, like out in front and understand the capabilities of what we can do with data. But I think also advocates of our own programs and ourselves, like how can places serve us better? And sometimes that requires us also learning more about our needs and what we can do with that. Um, but I think that that's a really important part, and that's a really fun thing to work with folks on that have so many ideas and they know what needs to get done, but they have so many demands and pressures coming down that they don't really necessarily step into the role with agency of how to make those tools work better for them.
And you paint a really good picture of just the complexity that a tool like this is entering into, right? Uh, I mean, I heard in my conversations that faculty and placement coordinators would spend hours manually pulling data from one system, manipulating it in a spreadsheet, pushing it to another system for state or accreditor reporting. And these were, sometimes very costly software solutions that took, a significant amount of time and energy on the part of an IT organization and the college to implement and put into place. And so they felt very much like, I've got to make it work. I've got to make this system work
because we're paying so much money for it,
and because it took so much to implement it, right? Like it's such a big lift. But I don't know. I think that when the platforms, they aren't talking to each other, and then information gets missed, it can really create a huge problem. What do you feel is maybe the biggest opportunity for, let's say someone's gonna start fresh. They're gonna start fresh. What's the biggest opportunity for them in actioning the use of a technology? I know that, and you can't do it all at once. You can try, you can build big teams, and over the course of a time, you'll build it out. But what's the biggest bang for the buck thing that you do inside of, say, Craft's solution that would get them the greatest amount of value?
Sure. And I won't even limit it to within Craft, because I think something that we strive to do well is to really lead with honest conversations, because I don't know that we are the solution for everybody everywhere. And I think that that's an important thing to be able to note. Like, teaching people how to learn is really critical for me. And I think that I speak for many of us at Craft as well, for whatever the tool is. Because the last thing that we ever need, and I know this, to your point earlier, the diffusion of innovation, like what it takes to actually implement something at scale, you could be 2 or 3 years in before you even realize that it doesn't meet the needs that you have. And that's a rough thing to be able to, and then go back, okay, psych, sorry guys, it's actually not going to work for us. And so getting it right from the start and pushing back, because I mean, I'm always going to be like, the pro teacher, like pro consumer in this space, because we don't have time. We don't have time for the nonsense of external things, because at the end of the day, kids need to learn today, and kids have got to be better off today. And we've got to be able to prepare the teachers preparing those kids today. So I do take that type of efficiency and urgency really seriously. But through that, something that is rewarding, and as someone who was on the other side, who was a consumer, a user with Craft whenever it was still forming, is almost the bespoke nature of it. Because again, no two programs are alike. Like, you've met one EPP, you've met one EPP. And so even with things I've said earlier, I spoke widely in generalities. Same thing for apprenticeship programs that are forming. Having a space that's like adaptable and sort of listens to what folks need, that's really critical. So it's like, whether it's Craft or it's anywhere else, like being able to communicate with someone that wants you to adopt their technology, be very honest about what you need, but also listen to your team, because I don't know what my whole department would need in any particular space if I'm not putting in all the stakeholders. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in having to be the decision maker that we forget we don't have to do that alone. And we're not really bringing in the voices of the field, like the people it's going to impact the most. And what might seem really cool and bright and shiny for us is a huge, cumbersome thing that makes a mentor teacher's job 10 times harder on the ground. And so I think the more we can plan for what things look like in reality and not just how great it sounds or how great the person selling it to us makes it sound, the better it's going to be, and the more we can get to sort of honest conversations in having our needs met where it comes to technology and our programs.
Yeah. I mean, I really appreciate the kind of the transparency about the complexity. I also appreciate kind of the honesty that you and that others at Craft I've talked to have had about just like we want to be good partners first. And and truly, I mean, a technology is a technology. I get it. Like it's um, you know, at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're on a mission to actually improve metrics here around teacher preparation programs. And so let's shift a little bit to this apprenticeship, uh, the registered apprenticeship space. So it's forming, it's happening at different institutions that I spoke with institutional leaders. I had differing levels of familiarity and depending on the state, right? And um, so for EPP leaders listening who've heard the term but don't fully understand how it works, can you kind of break it down? Like talk a little bit about what it is, why it exists, and what you're excited about most from this kind of an approach.
Yes. So whenever we think of apprenticeship, it's the oldest approach to really working work-based learning that we've got as human beings, like apprenticing under a master and building our skill and then striking it out on our own, right? And to some degree, teaching feels like that. It just doesn't feel like it until someone's a student teacher in that last bit of their time in their studies. And so if you put it all together, we use apprenticeship all the time, like sort of in welding and automotive, like fields where you've got to be able to do the thing. And that's how you measure the mark of the program that trained you. And it's very easy to see it from day one, like how well you were trained. So taking that concept and putting it in fields that were not always apprenticeable, or so we didn't think. And teaching is very much one of those because of how well it works. And it's so interesting because I was, an instructional coach for 13, 14 years of my time. But usually it's after a person already graduates. And oftentimes they're not ready on day one. And so they become an apprentice anyway. And that's going to still happen, even with a highly trained teacher from a program that maybe is doing all the things that are right if such a place can exist, because teaching is learning and there's no way to separate that because we have to be able to learn really quickly as teachers. And so an apprenticeship degree is taking all those concepts together, and it's taking something that used to be in fields that you didn't need a degree for necessarily, and making sure that people have access to that by using their time on the job in a variety of different ways to account for a great deal of the learning that happens in their college experience. And so in the program that I designed, we had about half of our program came from what they were doing on the ground. But the reason is because what they were learning, I would test myself. If you can't use this tomorrow, why am I even teaching it to you? If you can't do something with this in your practice, what are you taking a semester of it for? And so it's almost a mindset shift and understanding that teaching too can be seen, that we can teach people immediately how to understand that the input for me is the output that I'm going to see. Whatever I do or don't do today and reflect on is going to have an impact on my classroom tomorrow. So it's just taking that idea that we already do once a teacher starts to practice, but taking that into higher ed and understanding that process itself can start early, where literally their learning becomes the basis of the degree. I think what's most exciting about it is who benefits from that. And the answer is anyone who is already working in the field, because in order to qualify for an apprenticeship degree, you have to have you have to have a job that actually ties you to the audience that you're seeking to become adept at teaching. And in our case, it's paraprofessionals or school janitors, bus drivers have even come through programs like this. And the principle is still the same. And it's such an amazing opportunity. And I think it's really exciting, like as a country, to be embracing something that maybe other countries have already started on for quite some time ago.
And it's super smart. I guess like maybe help us understand a little bit about what like the DOL labor or the Department of Labor requirements are for registered apprenticeship too. Like, is that fairly well understood?
Well, I think it's becoming more understood. But the thing is, like the requirements, high level, aren't that nebulous. The person to qualify to be an apprentice, you need to be employed. There's got to be a certain amount of wage progression because this does need to look and feel like an apprenticeship. And there's got to be an ability to continue to increase your skills, which we know just from workforce, from economic development, that a good job is one where you can continue to level up in your job. And then whenever I say wage progression, like from year to year, as you level up in your job, you should be able to see some type of incremental wage increase that honors what you have proven that you can do from a competency perspective. And I think that whenever you put all of that together and understand that it also requires you to have a dedicated mentor, in our case in education, working alongside you to ensure that you're getting better, that the program is doing what it says it's going to do, that's training you, and that the impact, in our case, learners, are all benefiting from what's happening from your learning institution, from what you're taking in and how you're changing day to day and improving what you're doing.
So can a traditional EPP retrofit an existing program into an apprenticeship, or does this require a completely new design and approach?
Yeah, it in many ways it can, like, in fact, I've seen more cases where very minimal changes are required. And for everything else, it depends. Like learners in our classroom, we have to meet where we are, right? You can only start where you're beginning. And so if a program already has a great deal of work-based learning, like if there's already like an authentic learning element, they're already like the pump's already primed for them to be able to sort of switch over. If they're already allowing and encouraging and have like set the conditions to support adult workers who are already working in the field, which means, are there courses accessible, or are they only available during the day? Do you have to physically be able to go to campus? Is this made for a working person? So some of it is like logistical things like that. Where I've seen program design shift, sometimes it's a matter of having a stellar program, but maybe starting it sooner. Like we talked about, stellar program, it's all packed into the last 2 years. But what can we do in terms of like changing that so they can have access to that coursework a little bit sooner? And I think most of all, the biggest shifts aren't the ones that happen on paper. I think the biggest shifts are the ones that happen almost philosophically, and from leadership, and like, what does this college believe fundamentally about teaching and about who should have access to learning what it takes to be a great teacher. And that's the biggest thing that I've seen, because it's sometimes we hold on to those ideals that we can't even name whenever we're listing barriers. But 9 times out of 10, the barrier isn't one any stronger than you just you gotta wanna do it. And you gotta believe that you have the team in place that can still deliver the quality that a aspiring teacher deserves to be able to give those kids in their class the education that they deserve.
Oh, this is great. I Look, you actually travel around the globe. I was going to say you travel across the country. I know you've done a lot of traveling in talking on these topics. You're working with EPP deans, assessment directors, field coordinators across the country today. What's sort of the number one bit of advice that you're giving them right now in terms of where their focus and energy should be?
Oh gosh. Honestly, right now, it's stoking the belief that they can do it, and that even though we've already asked them to do so much with so little, that it's possible. But the biggest part is that you're not alone. This is one project that we cannot like superhuman cape it up and go solve. Apprenticeship is not designed to be done in a silo. And I think that is really critical. You do not need all the answers. You don't have them because you're not a part of workforce. You're not a part of today's classroom, and you're not a principal of the school where you're placing people. And I think that that's a really important thing too, that in education, we are so used and conditioned to having to solve the problems alone without a lot of money and it feels like without a lot of support, and nothing could be further from the truth with this. And so whenever I meet with spaces and we sort of do attention check, like what's giving you the most trouble right now, 9 times out of 10 it's the areas that they've just never had to deal with before. And the good news is there is another part of your team that has dealt with that, and it's their job to do that, and they would be honored to come along on this journey with you. And in the case of this, it's having somebody from workforce development, having someone from the actual district, the school system, the network, present in real time, giving you real, transparent advice on what to do and what they need on their job site. Not what you think they need, but what they actually need for their community. And then the other piece is the beauty of being able to be in a position to deliver that. And I think that's probably the best advice that I give starting out. And I think that it is very, very powerful to shift our lens and understanding, because the longest time we think I'm preparing a teacher so that they can go into this classroom and prepare this kid. But teaching is a workforce solution, and it extends way beyond the work of preparing that teacher. And I think whenever we start to think like that, we start to think like we're part of workforce preparation and what it takes to build an economy and what it takes to actually build the fabric of society, which is human capital. It's a game changer in terms of getting more minds and more brilliance and more hands on deck, and leading from a sense that it takes more than just our one space to make that magic happen.
You are in the world of education. You're really a visionary. I'm listening to the way you talk about this stuff, and you're not just telling me about the things that need to happen, but you're also talking about kind of core belief. And I think that really kind of brings us to where I want to kind of close this conversation, which is really just about your core belief, your vision for what it looks like when we get this right, right? Like you've talked about the challenges, you've talked about different ways we can solve it, but we get it right. And let's say it's 5 years from now, and everything that's progressed in the way that you best hoped. What does it look like? What does that look like?
Um, well, oh, the dreams. It looks like every single child has access to a high quality education from a highly skilled teacher, regardless of their zip code, right? That's how we know it works. Um, like if the mark of my work as a teacher in a classroom, it's not how vibrant and cool my lesson was. It's like, did my kids learn the thing today? Then the mark of success for when we do this, it's can we deliver on the human capital, on the promise, not only to every child, but to the workforce, that we have enough people that are skilled to be able to deliver on that promise, not only on a high quality education, but does the workforce have the teachers it needs so that they can have the people that they need. And so I think that's what perfect looks like. And I grin when I say it because I accidentally left my classroom. If I had my druthers, like if we solve teacher shortage, I'm going to be back teaching again. So whenever I'm back teaching, it means we've solved all the problems. And I think that that's a very big piece. But the other piece is just, if I've learned nothing else as a teacher, is that it's iterative and it's progressive, and it's, don't lose the philosophy, don't lose the mindset, because be willing, like, yes, our program's so good, but guess what? In 5 years, the world's going to change. Are we still meeting the workforce demand? Are we still creating the teachers that schools of that time are going to need? And do I think that it's going to fundamentally change in the terms of what we do with human connection and humanity? No. But we also have to be open to understand that just because we sealed it doesn't mean wait another 70 years before we take a look and breathe new life into it again. It's living and it's breathing. And like I would tell my faculty, whenever I was, the dean, is that this field is not the place where you come to die. It's the place where you come alive, and you just remember that, like, by the time you think your work's done, it's probably time to go home because it's never done. And that's the spark of it. And I think for those of us who love the work, it's what we love the most about it, is that it's not a stagnant profession. The classroom is not a stagnant place. The world is not a stagnant place. And we need to make sure that we are staffing, and that every teacher is in place where we need them, but that we've also created a system that's continuing to be responsive and adaptive and reflective, so that we're not in the same rut again in another 20 years.
Yeah. Before we close, I get I've gotten a really great sense of from you about your work at Craft, and from you about Craft as an organization, as a nonprofit organization. And I guess I am thinking for the education leaders listening who are curious about apprenticeships or about how Craft might support their work. One thing that I'm hearing from you is that you're not just here to push a technology. You're actually wanting to actually help with a transformation that needs to take place, right? And so I wonder, what's the best way to start a conversation with you and with Craft? Like, if they're wanting to take some next steps, it's not that they have to think, oh, I've got to be ready to deploy a new technology, right? So tell me, like what is the best way to start a conversation with Craft, and how should they think about engaging Craft?
Oh gosh, that's such a good question. And the first thing I would say is never let, like, perfection get in the way of progress. If this was easy, we'd all be doing it. It is hard. And the challenges of a school leader, whether it's, pre-K 12 or higher ed, oh my gosh, they're vast. They're vast, these challenges, right? And I think because our profession draws so many folks who want to get it right and who recognize the pressures that exist, we want to have every duck in a row before we reach out and take another step. But whenever it comes to reaching out to Craft, it's okay to reach out and say, I don't even know what I don't know. Okay, great. Send it to me and let me love on you. Let me find out, because I bet you know a lot more than you think you do. And sometimes you just need, like, a mirror to shine up to you to see, okay, I have a nose. I've got the part. I just maybe need to turn it in to something different. And so it's like, if you're at a space where you already have pre-apprenticeship or apprenticeship rocking and rolling, that's a really easy conversation. Reach out to Craft. It's a free data management tool that can help you boost that to the next level. Or, by God, become more efficient where you're not having to do everything by hand or keep things in multiple places, which that's a godsend, just the gift of time, right? If you're ready to go, that's so easy. And if you're not ready to go, you're like, I would love to even know what I need to put it in a day. That is real. And that's where I started. Like, I know I've got the passion, but how do I get the thing? And we can help with that too. And so it's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to only have questions. But just take a step. The only bad step is 10 steps backwards, right? So you've got nothing to lose. And if the solution is you got what you need, or wow, you already have a data, you already have the steps, then it could be just as becoming like the best hype people ever and getting more people to learn from what you already know. But I guess the central idea is just take a step, just move forward. You don't have to have it figured out. You probably have more to teach us than you have to learn. And most of all, you're not alone. Like, you've got a whole team, and we can connect you to it if you don't even know who your people are yet.
Yeah, it sounds like Craft is a real collaborator in this space, and a real resource available at this stage. Kimberly Eckert, thank you so much for taking the time to really unpack everything from EPP to apprenticeships and the crazy world that we're in, and how to best move forward in this space. Appreciate you taking the time.
Of course, and thank you so much, Darin Francis, for allowing me to harbinge with you. It's a pleasure, and I love talking about any of this. but especially somebody with your background and your curiosity. So thank you.